Alright, so, I watched, Snyder's cut of Justice League probably, like, a week ago at this point, and I've pretty much been asking myself since then, how do you talk about something that's pretty much unlike anything we've ever seen before, which is kind of funny because of the whole criticism that all superhero movies are more or less the same, like they kind of have the same goals and the same setups and all that, and the way they do character development. But sometimes that's over the course of many movies, and sometimes, in the case of Justice League, we kind of get all that compressed into technically three movies, but as far as like the whole group, really just kind of one with somewhat of a tiny intro in its previous movie. Um, so, as far as this being a thing at all, I was one of those people where I wasn't quite sure because you hear about sort of director's cuts or whatever all the time, or like studio interference and stuff like that. And after a while, you kind of get cynical to it because it's like when you eventually see, a director's cut or whatever, typically it doesn't feel like there's that much different, usually. And so when the 2017 version of Justice League came out, and we had heard about how, Joss Whedon came in and took over, it was the whole thing of, yeah, you could tell, like, he added some comedy lines here and there. But I was under the impression that most of it was Snyder, and Whedon just kind of touched some things up and then sent it out. Um, which which sounds insane now that you've seen the two different ones. But that I remember in 2017, that's what I was under the impression is what happened. I was not aware that Whedon had added like whole other pointless subplots in place of like really gargantuan set pieces. Like it's one of those cases where you look back and it's like you're not even quite sure how the 2017 version happened the way that it did because I didn't realize just how much Snyder had put into it at the time. And another thing about this also is that how I was kind of open to the idea of a what at the time I would have thought was a slightly different version, like taking the 2 hour movie and making it like a 2.5 hour movie or something. Was the fact that, like I said, usually it would sound like that's not really not much is usually changed. It's usually scenes that where you can see them and you're like, well, it's nice that's here, but I can also see why it was cut as well. But then in 2016, the year before, we had Batman vs Superman, and there was the 2.5 hour version that was put in theaters, which I thought was fine, but had like a lot of problems. And then when the Blu-ray came out, it came out as the extended cut or the ultimate cut, and it was a 3 hour version. And it's like, all right, so they added another half an hour to it. Maybe it won't be too different. Like it'll be clear which ones are deleted scenes or whatever. And surprisingly, it was like significantly better and felt shorter, despite being half an hour longer. And it's one of those cases where you can see that it's almost like when they do this, it's almost like they can read the mind of like a fan and like make the changes accordingly. Like when Batman vs Superman first came out, I was kind of put off by something that seems very minuscule, which was the way Lex's introduction was split up, where we got Lex's first scene on the basketball court, and then some introduction, some more introduction, and then we cut to something else, and then we cut back to him getting Zod's body doing the whole thing. And my criticism the day Batman vs Superman came out was those Lex scenes should be pushed together as one big scene. Um, and that's exactly what happened in the Ultimate Cut. And it's like the way they sort of, they almost read your mind happened again in Justice League, where it was like one of the only scenes that seems to go like more or less untouched from the 2017 version was what might be my favorite scene in the 2017 version, which is when Barry meets Bruce, and the whole thing where he like throws the batarang and all that. And I said like that was my favorite scene in the 2017 version. The only thing I didn't care for was the whole thing about like they went a little too into the Barry being a comedic character thing with the whole brunch thing. and it felt very Whedon and stuff like that. And sure enough, when you see that scene in the Snyder Cut, as far as I remember, it's more or less untouched, except that the brunch thing isn't there. And it's like the way they're just able to like you can tell exactly in many ways how it can be fixed. And not only do they do that, but they also do things that you would have never realized you needed until you got them, or things that needed to be gone that you didn't necessarily. Well, it may be more so the case. You kind of can realize what probably shouldn't be there or what can be gone. Um, there is one thing as far as Barry being a comedic character that I kind of thought was a Whedon thing. That actually there's a couple of things where it's like I kind of thought they were like Whedon things and they wouldn't show up here, but they actually are here. So it's also interesting to think that those scenes are here, yet apparently the studio thought, oh no, we need like more of that, only more Whedon like, which is weird. Like the scene I'm talking about mainly being when Barry meets Diana for the first time and he, introduces himself the wrong way and then he does the whole, oh that's your signal, that means it's time to go. I could have sworn that was Whedon shit. So I was so I was a little surprised that it was still here. And I do think that Ezra Miller carries the comedic stuff very well, and like perfectly plays the character. But I do think they went in on it like a little much. I also kind of thought all of them vanishing in the Gordon scene, and it's only Flash left, and he says, "Also they just vanish." Well, that's rude. That's another thing I could have sworn was a Whedon thing. So with Barry, it's kind of hard to tell what was what. But they did cut it down enough to where, because I do think I remember when I did that video with my brother right after we had seen the theatrical cut in 2017 was that Barry was a little too comedic, and you can tell that it is cut down, like all the Pet Cemetery references and stuff like that, which were kind of funny, aren't here, and it's probably for the better that they're not here. Um, so basically, the short form of all that is I really appreciate just how much that they can sort of. I said almost it feels like my mind is being read on what's wrong with it, and the way that they fix those particular things is really satisfying as far as a viewer goes. Because I'm assuming many viewers had some of the same issues, so going into I don't really know exactly how to go into this. I have like little notes written here, but they're all over the damn place, as I'm sure many people might criticize this movie for basically being. But especially since it's like it's almost kind of like a lot of short films, just kind of almost all the way through. And I can see a lot of people complaining about that, but I've said many times before about various different movies that I've never really had a problem if something feels episodic. Um, but it's, I mean, as far as like the whole story goes, it is something that is much more, say, I don't know if coherent's the word, but it matters more in this one. Like, there's the whole sequence where I guess it's been out long enough, and the people who really wanted to see this have seen it probably multiple times over by this point. So we're probably going to get into like spoilery stuff. In fact, I'm actually going to go into something spoilery right now, so just for that warning. The whole idea of, and I don't want this to be entirely a this is what this one did right and that's what the theatrical cut did wrong kind of thing, but it's just kind of bound to happen. Like for instance, the case of after they've resurrected Superman and they have the whole fight sequence there, there's the other sequence where that's when Steppenwolf gets, the box. And this whole thing of him retrieving the box is this big thing with Joe Morton's character. Because obviously one of the big things here was all the Ray Fisher stuff and about not his whole thing about basically outing Whedon to the side. As far as like the way his character was treated in the theatrical version, how he was almost cut into, he got that whole sort of Adrian Brody thing happening, where Adrian Brody was supposed to be the lead in The Thin Red Line, and he showed up at the premiere and saw they had like 2 minutes of screen time and was basically in the background. Obviously, nothing that extreme happened to Cyborg, but it's relatable. Like they're comparable. Uh, so And the whole idea of how Snyder basically said that Cyborg was intended to be the heart of the movie. And I feel like a lot of that comes into play with how important Silas, the Joe Morton character, is here, and the relationship between them, and really just the sort of continuous father thing throughout. And it's obviously it's quite eerie when you see what Snyder was going through when he had to, you know, change hands to Whedon. That there's such a sort of fatherly theme throughout the entire movie. But the thing here is that this whole thing where Silas basically sort of sacrifices himself in regards to this box, but the box ends up getting taken anyway. But there's still something there, even when you just think like the big tragedy of it is that he died for no reason. But once they realize what he was doing is when we kind of get in the right direction. So there was still purpose. But the thing here is that that's a whole thing. And that's the whole sort of like everything between Victor and Silas was sort of culminating to this point, and then this point is kind of the jumping off point to get to the climax. If I remember correctly, in the theatrical version, they've just finished fighting Superman, and then they see a beam in the background and just go, oh, well, shit. He got the last box. Well, damn. If I remember correctly, that's more or less how it went down. So it's stuff like that that really shows you. Like, I have seen some criticisms already of people coming out of this, and it's really this kind of people where you don't know why they really went into it in the first place, because they probably weren't into the story to begin with the other two movies leading into this. And they just, maybe they just wanted to hate on it. I don't know. I don't want to entirely speak for those people, but there will be some people that probably view the movie that way just for the sake of it. And some of those people, and I can't quite wrap my head around this. Some of those people have said that I've seen those people say there's not much different. Like it's the same movie, just extended. I don't really buy that at all, and I don't know how anybody could possibly argue that point. Though I haven't looked into it enough, but I don't see what I mean. Yeah, obviously the plot, but this is also the kind of thing, though, and this might open it up to more criticism also. But the fact that it only seems to half matter what the plot of this movie is. Because really the whole thing is... Because one of the big criticisms the 2017 movie got was the fact that it came so early. Like, it came before we got an Aquaman movie, before this Flash movie that's still taking forever to get going. And they're like, it feels like we especially needed a Cyborg movie going into it. And it's like, to jump straight from Man of Steel to Batman vs. Superman to a Justice League movie felt very premature. But that's kind of the thing that this movie's doing, is that it's kind of giving us all this... Like, when I talked about how it's like a series of short films, that it's like, with this 4-hour version, we're kind of getting condensed versions of them having individual movies before the plot, with the boxes comes into it. And that's... And yeah, I do think it would, just have, probably more weight if we did have individual movies going in. Just setting that to the side and thinking about it as us getting the origin of pretty much all of these characters, with the exception of the couple that have gotten movies beforehand. And seeing how it gives us sort of everything about them leading into this, and then they branch off into their own stuff. Because, I mean, if you talk about it, all superhero movies kind of being the same thing and having the same structure, this is definitely different, to basically do what you expect, just in reverse, where they team up and then they get their individual movies, most of them. And so a lot of it rests on how well we get to know them throughout this particular movie. And yeah, so when you whittle this down to 2 hours, you're obviously not going to get that. Like, I specifically remember when Batman vs. Superman came out, and then it was like, at 2.5 hours, it was like, yeah, that's probably about right, but it wasn't that great. And then they're like, alright, well, here's a 3-hour cut. And it's like, oh wow, that's actually quite better. You're like, so okay, now that we've established that, how big and gigantic is this Justice League movie gonna be? Like, holy shit. And when the 2 hour runtime was released, there was like a big collective, oh shit. I feel like that can't be good. Like, I know some people were relieved because they're like, yeah, I'm kind of worn out on really long, epic blockbusters. So it's like seeing something that's just a big, epic blockbuster, but just condensed to 2 hours might have been kind of a relief. And it's like, all right, I'll see how they handle that. But it's, I think a lot of us were like, that can't be good. That cannot be a good sign. Like, what can you do with all of this in just 2 hours? And now, as we've seen, now that we have our little neutered version, with other things going on in it that weren't supposed to be there, yeah, it's clear that there was an issue. And that's the thing, too, is the fact that it was still only 2 hours by taking things out. Like, the fact that, like, something I still haven't been able to wrap my head around in this whole week is the idea of taking out Flash going back in time and like rearranging everything, and instead you've got this whole family. I don't even remember what the hell was going on with the family thing. Come to think of it, I just remember him saving a family. Like, I don't remember who the hell they were, what their significance was, if they had one at all. Maybe they were just there to be saved. I don't know. But it's, but it's weird, and that's the whole thing too. Was when you talk about telling this whole story, it's like one of the things in Batman vs Superman I found really confounding, like even in the 3 hour version that I liked significantly more, was the Bruce having the vision of Flash, or maybe he had just had the nightmare sequence, and then he had the Flash thing. It was like they're showing us a whole lot of things here, and I don't know what's real and what isn't. It's a lot at once. And it's like, even coming out of the extended version of Batman vs Superman, I was like, what the hell is that thing where Flash appears in front of him? Like, what the fuck is that? And I was like, okay, so Justice League's gonna tell us. Alright. Well, not only did the 2017 Justice League not tell us what that was, they actively made the decision to not tell us what it was. When in this version, it's there are some things that still aren't extremely clear to me, but I feel like I get it significantly more than I did before, and it's like, okay, it makes enough sense to me now. But it's one of those things where I'm assuming if I watch it, like, multiple times over, it'll say there, because the movie gives you a lot to take in, like, at once. Like, if, like, I think it can be forgiven if some people miss a thing or two or a detail or two on just one viewing alone, because, like I said, this is 4 hours that's giving us pretty much a constant 4 hours of stuff to take in. And there's obviously going to be complaints that it doesn't need to be 4 hours. And I think a lot of the complaints in regards to that is Snyder's use of slow-mo, which is pretty much something he's always been criticized for, but it's in one case, yeah, I can see it, where it's like if you were to sort of add up all of the slow-mo scenes in it, and maybe not necessarily, like, take out the slow-mo entirely, but maybe cut it down slightly to where it's like the scenes don't go as the slow-mo moments don't go as long as they do. You might see somewhat of a dip in runtime without really losing anything. But I mean, there's also the argument you can make about how it's you're basically asking a director to not use their trademark, which is a really weird thing to do. But I do get, clearly where it can be a little excessive, and maybe you could cut down like 20 minutes or something just on slow-mo alone. But there's also, that's hard to say, because sometimes it's hard to pinpoint what's legitimate and what isn't as far as complaints go, because, and usually I wouldn't think about that too much. Like what other people's complaints are. Like, I normally wouldn't really give a fuck, but the fact that we're talking about a movie that's whole existence kind of comes from the outside source of the people that watched the theatrical cut, it's much more interesting to kind of go into that angle and see, like, where we started and where we've ended up now because of this, massive push from the outside. the main problem I found with some of these, criticisms, whether they come from fans or non-fans or whatever, or people like me who are just kind of neutral, where like I like Snyder quite a bit and I really love his passion for what he does, but I'm not like one of the, big fans. But like I'm not like in love with any of his movies. Like I was in love with Watchmen when it came out. But as the years have gone on, I've seen a few more faults in it to where I'm not as in love with it as I was. But I still like it a really good deal, as I do pretty much all of his movies. I go back and forth on how I feel about Sucker Punch. Sometimes I really like it, sometimes I'm not so sure. It just like every time I go back to it, it kind of goes back and forth. But the thing about a lot of the criticisms is that people, I don't know if this is like an internet age thing or what, where people have access to like, just cutting things down, to like cutting full scenes down to just a YouTube clip and being able to analyze the shit out of something. The stupid shit that people dwell on, it gets to me at times. And more often than not, I really don't get what it is that people are like really, really complaining about when it's like just this one thing and people will just go on and on for hours about one mundane, meaningless thing and say it's like the one reason the movie fails entirely. Even if that movie is 4 hours long, it'll be this one thing. There's the big and the big thing here seems to be the use of Wonder Woman's music whenever she appears is like the same every single time. And it's like, yeah, when you cut that down and do a montage that's like a minute and a half on YouTube, it sounds pretty ridiculous. I maybe it's me. I didn't notice that watching it, and I don't really care either. like but it's those things where it feels like everybody just wants to be the one that discovers the new meme or something. So they look for these things that are like really fucking meaningless and just harp on it over and over and over again when it doesn't matter in the long run. That's the kind of thing that I don't get. So that's... And yeah, and the more you point out stuff like that, the more people start to like turn on a movie as a whole. And it's kind of fucking stupid, but I guess that's just the age we live in now, so there's that. I will say, as far as like the whole it feeling like one big giant world, is one complaint that I had about the 2017 movie was there is a scene at the Daily Planet, I believe, between Lois and Martha, which is in this movie, but interestingly enough, in a different location, in Lois's apartment. But the complaint that I had was it was weird that you were making a movie that was supposedly supposed to be the kind of the whole world coming together, the whole universe coming together, and you had a scene at the Daily Planet that did have Lawrence Fishburne in it. And it's like, you can't have him just walk by and say something to Lois. It's like to make it everything feel complete and like everything is here, because I think that'd be the point of a movie like this. Hilariously enough, Lawrence Fishburne still isn't in this, even at 4 hours. But that makes more sense now because they put in this whole thing about how a bit of time is focused on Lois's grieving, and then there's the whole conversation where Martha mentions that Lois hasn't been back to work since Clark's death. So that makes it make much more sense. And I still don't know how I feel about that scene, because I do feel like there's the reveal in that scene, but where it kind of undercuts this, like it's a really great moment between Lois and Martha that feels really real and human, and it seems like a really like an actual authentic look at like grieving. And then it's kind of undercut by the fact that it was all kind of a ruse. I mean, obviously I still get it to an extent of why that's the case, but as far as like interaction between Lois and Martha specifically, I feel like it could have been really strong, but it is what it is. So, but that's another case where when you look at like really just the opening credits sequence, and you're seeing all the names, like Willem Dafoe being here and everything. Um, and it's like, it could be seen as all these big actors are coming in and they're basically just here for a couple of minutes and they kind of say their lines and then they're gone, and it's like, it might seem like kind of a waste, but it's like I said, the fact that it feels like we're kind of getting the individual backgrounds of each one before they take off into their own individual thing or into a bigger, um, whatever, a bigger story or whatever. Um, you kind of have, like, that's the thing where if we had, the Aquaman sequences and Willem Dafoe wasn't here for that, 30 seconds or whatever he's here for, something would feel like it was missing, like something would feel incomplete. So the fact that they have these little appearances, even if, you know, obviously if there's, one problem, with the, Aquaman sequences, it would be, the fact that Mira's here. But it's, that's the kind of thing where that's actually very convenient for people watching this at home, because obviously in the theaters, they're doing like a full kind of intermission kind of thing. And if, say, you wanted to watch it just in one full sitting at home, it's like, well, where are you going to take your breaks? Well, there's two things. Number one, the movie is split up into parts. Or number two, you can do whatever you need to do during the Amber Heard scenes. So you get a whole bunch of different, places that you can split it up in. But yeah, as far going back to the lowest thing though, that is another complaint that I found as far as like length goes, where it was like some people thought there were too many cuts of Lois just getting coffee or walking around or whatever. I remembered feeling that way while I was watching it. But the more that I thought about it, the more it was like, it does do, like talking about Lois's grieving in that scene with Martha, where it's like getting these scenes where we kind of feel just how alone Lois is. Because we really only get that interaction with Martha slash Harry Lennox. But we also get like that one moment with like her and the cop where it becomes, we see that it's become a thing where she comes to what was once the monument, and just kind of grieves, and it's like the fact that it makes her feel so isolated and alone from everything, I do think says something in the long run about, because that's the thing also where it's like, I was talking before in another video about knee-jerk reactions to things. And it's like, yeah, watching this, and then, like, because a lot of people will watch this and then just kind of immediately give their thoughts on it. Or like I said, a lot of people are on YouTube just literally, it's you watching them watch it. So it's like, it's in that moment, it's easy to say, like, oh, another shot of Lois getting coffee, or oh, another shot of Lois walking by herself. But it's like, once you see the whole picture and you realize the difference in those scenes versus the scenes where Clark is back and we see them reunited and we see that basically her life is whole again, and it's apparently going to continue to be in bigger ways, that were alluded to. It's definitely, the whole thing kind of has to speak for those individual moments at times. So yeah, so I'm wondering, going back now, if there's some of those little mundane things that were there that I maybe wasn't paying attention to at the time, or was thinking, oh, maybe this is bogging it down a little bit, that have more weight, when you actually see the whole thing and see like where it's going and how these things pay off in these different ways and all that. Another big criticism, from the theatrical version was that Steppenwolf was basically a load of bullshit. Which, yeah, there wasn't much. There was the big lead-in, when you saw the extended version of Batman vs Superman, where it was kind of terrifying when they came down to arrest Lex, and you could hear that demonic voice saying Lex's name as the cops were approaching. And it really set up this kind of terrifying villain. And then the theatrical cut of Justice League comes out, and it's that set. Like, I think Kieran Hines does his voice. Like, that's all. If I remember correctly, that's all he does. He just voices him. I remember Kieran Hines voicing protest on, like, really, that's how Steppenwolf turned out. I'm very disappointed. But, yeah, so they have continued to round him out much, especially bringing, Darkseid into it physically. And obviously the thing here is that first off, Steppenwolf does have to be threatening. So now he's got like the metal and all that, which makes him look like much sort of weightier and not just like some CGI villain or whatever. And he's really vicious. He's like ripping heads off with his axe and stuff like that. There's that line actually that's in the theatrical cut that's not in this one that I really liked and made him sound really threatening, which was if you want to talk about like we talked about Cyborg, or well we can talk more about Cyborg, but as far as like the motivation goes for each individual character, the fact that he's there's this big slaughter towards the beginning, and then there's this line in the theatrical cut when he says to Diana, if I'm remembering this right, "My axe is still slick with the blood of your sisters." It's like, that's a line I'm kind of surprised didn't make this one, when you talk about making him as big and threatening as possible. But the great thing about that also is that after we see him, ripping all these heads off and stuff like that, we do get these scenes with Darkseid, and the lead-ins to the scenes with Darkseid. And we realize that Steppenwolf's just basically kind of everybody's bitch. And I've seen that as a complaint too, to where it's like he's supposed to be the big bad villain and he's just kind of a bitch that just wants to appease everybody. But that's kind of the thing, is that it's more so, I think it's less like we get enough Steppenwolf build up, seeing what he's capable of in the early scenes, and all the bodies that he leaves behind. But then by the time we get to about the second half of this, it's kind of more about the build up to Darkseid. And the fact that you can take this big bad villain, and then we realize he's just kind of, Darkseid's bitch and just wants to do everything for him, I think is less saying like, oh, Steppenwolf's not what he thought he was. It's like, no, that means Darkseid is more than we thought he was, rather than the reverse there. So I'm okay with seeing those moments where Steppenwolf kind of just thrown to the side, and the fact that we see that he's just, the way he's built up as this big bad villain in the beginning, and then the last time we see him, his head is getting stepped on by the person he spent the whole movie trying to please. It's definitely clear they were setting up like a really much bigger picture here, and a much bigger, more threatening villain. So that's pretty much the way I see it, where it's like there's the first half of Steppenwolf and the second half of Steppenwolf, and both of those make him, and this is the thing too, is it's making him a rounded character. Which is what everybody complained about in the theatrical version, so that's... but, whatever. And then we get I guess while we're on the subject of him, the big battle sequence at the end, which is, it's because it starts off, and it starts off similarly enough to the theatrical version, and you're like, oh yeah, it's a bunch of CGIs like that. We've seen all that before. And it's a lot of animation, and you're so kind of immune to that at this point after all the other superhero movies, and it's like, oh, another big, and not just superhero movies, but other big epic battle movies or whatever, and you're just like, yeah, it's like everything here is animated, I don't give a shit. But then kind of the more it kept going, and we kept getting bigger and bigger, and this battle just kept going, and all these different things, whether it be, Flash turning back time or whatever. By the time it started off with me going, oh, that's a lot of CGI, I don't really care. And then like maybe 20 minutes later, after 20 minutes of this battle scene, it's like, this is enormous. Like when I finished it, and I told my brother, I was like, I watched the Snyder cut. And he said, how is it? The only thing I could think of in the moment to say right away was, it's huge. It's fucking huge. Which also you can kind of take into the whole aspect ratio thing, where he's kind of taking more of like the... At first I was like, did somebody fuck... They tell you at the beginning, but at first glance you might think like, oh, I don't know, it still kind of feels like somebody fucked up, I don't know. But then I was remembering on the Dark Knight's special features, you can watch the IMAX scenes in their IMAX format, and it basically looks like that, where it's more the square. And the thing is that it's, as far as like having that giant feel, like it's the kind of thing where you kind of associate that aspect ratio with like the old TVs, and you might think that that seems like, well, that doesn't feel very epic, but it's like it's basically kind of the reverse effect, where it's where you see like a really really widescreen movie and it's to show the mass of it. It's really the same thing, just vertically. Like when you see like a hero standing, you get like an entire full shot of them, and it makes everybody feel like really big and really tall, and kind of the whole movie would feel the same way. And that is one of those things where after a while, that's something I didn't even really notice. Was the fact that I mean, obviously you once you feel the hugeness, you get that vibe. Maybe in retrospect, but as far as like watching it and feeling like, is it going to be distracting to see it this way? I it kind of disappeared from me pretty quickly. I don't know how other people feel about that, but that's where I was with that. Um, like I said, good God, there's like, it feels like there's still so much here, and I feel like I've said so much already. Because like we haven't even talked about how Cyborg is like kind of the center of this, and it's a thing where you could really get that sense when we saw the announcement that this cut not only actually existed, but that we were going to see it, and all of the kind of individual actors reacted to it, and like everybody was really excited. Like Jason Momoa, I think, was like one of the first ones to jump on the train of get the Snyder Cut out, because I think that's when it kind of became kind of real to me, because it was sort of like I was kind of still in the cynical phase of, is the Snyder Cut going to be extremely different or whatever. And it's like they were doing the whole release of Snyder Cut thing. And it's like, okay, what? Good luck with that, I guess. And then it was when Jason Momoa jumped in on it. I was like, holy shit, is this like there's a whole other thing we haven't seen? And yeah, and like I said, the naivete of that is obviously coming through in a massive way once you've seen the whole what all was going on here and what all was inexplicably missing. When they cut it down to 2 hours and added whole other elements that didn't need to be there, and like using those elements that didn't need to be there to replace big epic moments like Flash going back or whatever. But yeah, just that whole motivation. Where I was talking about, like there's the fatherly theme, where we have all that stuff with Silas and Victor, and then there's also the thing with Barry and Billy Crudup in prison. And it does feel like kind of a letdown how Billy Crudup had to drop out of the Flash movie and be replaced by Ron Livingston, which is obviously we all love Ron Livingston, but it's like the continuity there, because the last scene with Barry and his dad is so good in Justice League and feels so earned. There's that whole thing. I guess another thing to mention would be Flash's first scene now, which is this whole thing where he saves the girl in the car accident, which I had to read into why he like kind of stopped, like he knew her when he first saw her, which I guess is a thing where he like there's like a girl in the comics that he knows through like different like from different universes or periods of time or something like that. Like there's something significant there that would have been gone into later, but yeah, the idea that we had this scene where we get this nice moment of him saving somebody, and it's interesting because another scene that I actually kind of liked in the theatrical cut was when Barry hesitates, and he's during the first action scene, and Bruce has to just kind of stop him and say, just save one, and trust me, you'll go from there. But just save one and then go from there. And I thought that was a really good scene, and it kind of establishes both of those characters in an interesting way, to show where they're coming from. But obviously now it makes sense that you would have to take that scene out, because now his introduction is like this is what he does already. He's saving people. So yeah, so basically either of those kind of work for me, but I do really like this particular introductory scene, because it also kind of shows his how he handles the comedy of everything, and then going like just when you think he's maybe getting a little too comedic, then the action scene comes in, and it's this really great moment. So Um, God, what even else? I feel like I'm gonna miss so much, but like I said, I feel like I've is there anything else? I don't know. I'm probably gonna remember a number of things afterwards, but yeah. But oh, the I guess the epilogue. But before we get into the epilogue, I did just want to just kind of overall in general, the whole thing about just making the characters feel more lived in, I think, cannot be expressed enough in regards to what all they've done with character work in this one. And like I said, basically making it feel like we got their individual moves before the action came into play. Like some people complain that it's 4 hours and it could have been cut down, especially if you take the slow mo out. But it also kind of feels like it's kind of crazy that it all fits into them, because it really doesn't. Like it's, I mean, it's easy to joke, and I have joked in the past about how it's like, yeah, how long it takes to watch this full movie and everything, but it really does. There's only really some of those moments in kind of the middle area where we're establishing things that seem mundane that might have payoffs later, to where it might feel like it's bogged down, but it still flows very nicely. Like I said, it's the basically the way I felt about Batman vs Superman, where it's like, as long as you have enough relevant things in here, the flow is going to be there regardless of runtime. And it's like I said, you can take a 2.5 hour movie and make it 3 hours and somehow make it feel shorter. Um, it's weird how obviously I can't say that this feels shorter than the 2 hour version, because that would just be ludicrous. But the flow feels much better. And you just, the fact that you give a shit so much more, and the build up of seeing everything individually and then them coming together, and how they all kind of play a part. Like it doesn't feel like there's somebody just kind of there to be there in the climax. Like they all have those moments where we have those moments where like we literally see Victor go into history and stuff like that. And it all just works together so well. So I guess if there's anything else that I missed, just it's yeah, somebody else will have mentioned it anyway. So as far as the epilogue, two scenes in particular, um, I was excited to see more of what Jesse Eisenberg was going to do with Lex, because I obviously, it's easy to criticize what Eisenberg was doing in Batman vs Superman. And I think I basically went into a whole thing about how I kind of loved it and I kind of hated it at the same time, what he was doing. Because the whole thing, where it's like, when people saw that he had been cast as Lex Luthor, the first thought was, what's already done. It's basically his Social Network performance. And and what we got was unexpected, I guess you could probably say. So now that we get him here, I do remember when it was the last post credit scene in the theatrical cut. He still kind of had that sort of like big cartoonish way about him. And here we pretty much get more of the same lines, but it's definitely clear they're different takes. And he does seem a lot more toned down, and there's even dialogue where Slade says that he's, I heard you were a few climbs short of a circus or something, which I don't know if that's the best line, but it's, it establishes, I was under the impression that you were insane, Lex. And the way Lex just nonchalantly says, well, the doctors at Arkham kind of, found a little bit of a breakthrough, and I'm a little more together now, which means I can be much more calculated, and not as manic, which is good news for the villains of this story. And like, obviously you can see there's still a bit of an over the top nature of him, but I still just kind of want to see more of what all he would do. And I was interested in the fact that when you see the projects and stuff that he takes in, and the fact that he, like, writes books of poetry and stuff like that, and writes plays, you would think that this would be one of those cases where Eisenberg would be an actor that feels like he's above this kind of thing, and that he would, like, just do it for whatever, to get money to make more indie movies or whatever. But he's mentioned multiple times that it's a character he wants to explore more and wants to keep coming back to. to see what else he can do with it. And I kind of love that. When actors can, like, actually really be drawn to these characters and want to know what else can be done with them. Um, but yeah, I do really like how he does seem more sort of like calculated now, and more like he's in control of what he's doing, in control of his own mind, I guess. Um, and I was kind of hoping, because he was, what the opening credits seem to be is it's the League, and then and Amy Adams is in there kind of in the middle, and then after that they're just alphabetical, like it goes Willem Dafoe and then Eisenberg and so on. Which took me a minute to figure out, because seeing Eisenberg so high, I was hoping, like, because I remember going into the theatrical cut of Justice League hoping that he had more to do, when it was just the post-credit scene. And it's still the same thing here. We get, in the opening scene, we get basically the shot of him right before he's arrested in the extended cut of Batman vs. Superman, and then that. Now, of course, this scene has a different ending than it does, and it was setting up the Ben Affleck's solo Batman movie we were supposed to get, and this is all conflicting too. How many things this sets up that we may or may not see, and it's like it's really whetting our appetites for it all over again. And I see that they're trying to start over again with the restore the Snyderverse thing, and I would be down for that. But I much like I was kind of saying in 2017, I'm not holding my breath, but we've seen what can happen. And I know some people are saying, like, this was really just kind of, HBO Max was really just kind of taking advantage of, oh, this will get a lot of people to, go to our platform and stuff like that. And that's really all they really wanted this to do. But it's still interesting that this feels like such kind of a triumph, not just for, like, a fan base, but for Zack Snyder himself, given the tragedy in his own life, and being able to basically come back and finish this in this big way. That's more like, obviously he's finishing a passion project, but it's also like this kind of, sort of became this monument to his daughter, more or less. Because when it got to the end, and we got the dedication, and then it was like, I remember thinking throughout the movie, like, I wonder if Gary Clark Jr.'s Come Together is gonna, that they're still keeping that, because it's like, that's a really awesome cover of that song. And then obviously we get the dedication, and then Hallelujah is playing over the credits, and it's like, oh, well, he used it in Watchmen already, but, alright. So then I was like, I wonder who's performing this version. And then when I looked that up, I got the whole thing. Where it was, I think she's like a friend of the family or something, and she performed it at his daughter's funeral, and because it was his daughter's favorite song. And then it's like, and that's also kind of when you just kind of let the credits roll, and that story now, is when it kind of sets in that this was more than just him completing his superhero passion project. That it was something for him, like, in his grieving process, and like being this, like I said, basically this giant monument to her. Then it kind of becomes a whole other thing, and like all the criticisms you have kind of feel like, and it might seem dismissive to say, oh, because of that you can't criticize. Obviously you can criticize it, but it's like, when you see it as that, all the criticisms or whatever just feel kind of, just gone with the wind, I guess. So, I guess the last thing is this sequence, where the nightmare sequence at the very end, where we get our anticipated Joker sequence. And I've seen mixed feelings on this. A lot of people think it's vastly improved. A lot of people think it's the same performance in Suicide Squad without the tattoos. I do like the sort of darkness of it, and the direction it's going, where like we kind of see them like really, because I don't know, he was on top of their car in Suicide Squad, but I don't think we ever saw them face to face in Suicide Squad the way he was with Harley for that brief time. And while a lot of it seems almost, maybe, I guess you could say it's almost trying too hard to be hardcore, like you've got the Joker saying, who's going to give you a reach around, and Batman saying, I'm going to fucking kill you in return. And then the whole build up to the death of Robin, which I had heard that Snyder wants to go into in some capacity, if his whole vision had been realized. which of course would be great to see. And like I said, there was the whole theories about, you know, what all these incarnations of the Batman and Joker and what their history was at the time. Um, and I'd heard that one thing about how, like, people didn't like the grill or the damage tattoo in Suicide Squad, of course. But then I had heard the theory where it was, that the reason Wayne Manor is not currently here or is in its current state is because the Joker basically burned it down. Maybe somewhere in the area he killed Robin, and then the origin of the grill and the tattoo was that Batman just, you know, almost beat him to death to where all of his teeth came out, thus making the grill necessary. And then the damage tattoo is basically saying, you know, this is what Batman did to me or whatever. And that's why he's got the mouth tattooed on his hand, to kind of replace the smile that he once had that Batman took away from him. That's just something that I heard. I have no idea if that's the actual story they're going for or if there's anything behind that at all. That was just like I don't know if it was a theory or what it was, but that was interesting enough. And you kind of get the vibe through this interaction, even if it's, you know, the nightmare sequence or the dark future or whatever. You get that vibe that this is probably close to what their interactions outside of a nightmare are like or were like or whatever. Um, and yeah, much like Eisenberg, it's a case where we're just getting it in like such small doses right now. It's just enough to make you say, what else could they do? Because I am very interested to see what Leto's Joker would be like, and kind of not, first off, not in the hands of David Ayer, and secondly, with more of these sort of like darker storylines, and not just in that whole whatever hot topic shit was going on in Suicide Squad. So yeah. So if there's and as I said, if there's anything else that I missed, there's obviously there's the interactions between, you know, Bruce and Alfred and stuff like that, and we get to see Batman actually doing some detective stuff here and there. Like he picks something up at one point, and it feels like, you know, you're watching some old detective story where he discovers some clue or something, and it's like that's the kind of thing that people have been wanting to see in a Batman movie for so long. Um, and we keep getting promised it, so we'll keep seeing what happens. And obviously we've got the totally separate Pattinson thing going on, which should be very interesting in itself. But it is, I am curious to see if all the, like I said, now that all the appetites are whetted again in regards to all this, what they're going to try to get Warner Brothers to do next, if anything at all. I know Snyder's been asked about a lot of stuff. He's talked about how he's like actually done some Green Lantern stuff with a particular actor that he has not named yet. And there are all these ideas and all these directions they could go, and right now he's just saying that it's all up in the air. Like, he doesn't, like, he's not saying like, oh, I've been basically told that this is it. But he hasn't really gotten any definitive yeses yet either, and they might be kind of far away if they are. So yeah, I'm certainly interested in. Definitely, this is a case where if I get the chance to see this theatrically, I'm more than likely going to take it. So that should be interesting. So yeah, I am interested to see if they can keep expanding this somehow. Because there's the whole thing of we don't know if we'll ever see Cavill as Superman again. We don't know if Affleck's going to come back again or not. Because it seemed to be good for Affleck health-wise when he dropped Batman, but like I said, if we're going to get more of what Snyder had, I think all the actors are going to be game for that. So it's just a matter now as if the backing will. So, but I'll be there for it, whatever they want to do. So we'll see what that is. I did hear that Warner Brothers is saying that the Snyder Cut's basically its own thing, and the theatrical cut is the canon. Which I think doesn't entitle it up, because I think I was reading that Patty Jenkins and James Wan were under the impression when they made Wonder Woman and Aquaman that the Snyder Cut was the continuity, so I don't know. They just need to get their shit together, I guess. Like, Warner Brothers needs to figure out what exactly they want to do, what direction they want to go in, and they don't always make the best decisions, so we'll just kind of maybe we might as well not hold our breath, and then maybe we'll get surprised, is the approach I would take. So, yeah, that's probably the best we can hope for. So, I'm gonna guess that's it for. Like I said, there's so much. I don't know if I missed anything, but if I didn't, I'm sure somebody else has touched on it and everything else that I already said anyway. So, I guess I will just leave this at this. So, I'm gonna keep trying to throw these out there. There's a couple of awards movies I need to talk about. Some new releases from like 3 weeks ago I still haven't talked about, and I'll be doing a kind of lone versus with like a new release and then a much older movie, and then we'll see if we can what kind of swing we're in by then. So until all of that stuff, I think that's it.